Last time on Sonic X.
Amy is later seen walking along the beach where she daydreams about Sonic, telling him in her head that he can't swim. He just cannot let Amy drown after all that she's done for him. Eventually Sonic gives up and lets Amy sit on top of him, still mad and grasping her hammer. It does tease the next few story arcs the show will get into, which could mean that in the next season things will finally pick up. And I can surely tell you that it will. This video took a bit longer to make than I thought, although I was mainly lazy. Sorry about that. Hopefully I won't take too long to develop the rest of the videos going forward, as I want to get this whole series done before the end of the year. Our story continues where it left off, 6 months after the E99 Exterminator fight to be exact. This time skip has officially kickstarted the Sonic Adventure arc. Amy moves into an apartment in Station Square where she lives there from here on out, much like how she did in the game. She expresses how much she misses the thrill of adventure, leading to her shouting out Sonic's name, much to the annoyance of her neighbours. I probably won't go too much into detail on Amy's game arcs in this season, since I think that energy would be better off saved from when I will eventually talk about those game portrayals in question. Even rewatching the first part, that video honestly felt more like a Sonic X review than an Amy one. I was mainly only trying to provide context as I thought that would be important, but I can see why it may came off more as me just giving an overall synopsis of the show than actually dissecting a character from it. I'll be sure to focus more on Amy specifically this time round, especially since I do actually have quite a lot to say about some of her key moments here. Instead, I'll just go through some of the differences and changes made between the show and the games. Amy stumbles upon a bird that was escaping the egg carrier, which she actually gives a name for, in this case Lily. When Amy and Lily get captured and being held hostage in the egg carrier, Amy explains to Lily how she made a gourmet meal to impress Sonic, as well as imagining a reunion with him where Sonic would be the one swooning over her instead. I absolutely love this scene because not only is it cute, but this is the first time we see Amy's interpretation of her crush for Sonic outside of a few flashbacks, even if it's really all in her head. It's a darn shame that this adorable reunion scene was completely removed from the dub, as it actually builds to her character, if you ask me. Amy also recalls the moment where she first met Sonic, triggering a flashback to where Amy chases after Sonic, only for Sonic to save her, pretty much the show's version of the same scene from the game. Exclusive to the Japanese sub once again, Amy also explains to Lily about telepathy, and how one's thoughts can carry over to someone else that they care about. She demonstrates this by calling out to Sonic in her head, which actually works. Again, this is another adorable scene that adds into their relationship that was unfortunately cut from the dub. I think now is probably a good time to address the elephant in the room. As I said in the beginning of the first part, the English dub of the show has been criticised, ridiculed, and mocked to Kingdom Come over its excessive censorship and removing content from the original version. One of those prominent examples of such is the topic of romance. As Amy's defining trait is her literally being in love with Sonic, you'd assume that she would be one of, if not the worst victim for this. And you'd be right. This is only one example of her emotional and romantic scenes being removed in the dub. There are a bunch of other notable examples throughout the show where Amy's love for Sonic was either altered from the original version to make it seem more one-sided than it already was, or completely removed entirely. Even something as small as Amy reaching out to Sonic when he's rescuing her from drowning does feel a little bit of a letdown to omit from the dub. There is one huge scene at the end of the season that suffers the most from this, but I can tell you that Amy isn't the only character in the show whose characterization has been affected by the dub, as we see later on with how Season 3 went with their relationships. Unlike the game, Amy is actually present during Gamma and Beta's self-destruction, where she sees the Flickies powering them reunite, which for some people might be seen as an improvement from the original, but I personally think the original scene with Gamma dying alone was way more impactful. To put it bluntly, the Gamma arc kinda felt a bit rushed for me. They tried to cram in what was roughly an hour-long story that overarcs another hour-long story into multiple 20-minute episodes, and it just doesn't work as well for me. Gamma felt a lot less sympathetic and likable here too. which is also a shame as they were the main reasons why I loved the character to begin with. At least the Japanese version gave Gamma a voice that sounded close to how he sounded in the games, but the English dub didn't even try to give Gamma a game-accurate voice at all. Gamma's English voice on the show is not good at all. Nothing against Andrew Reynolds, I love the guy, he is extremely talented. I just think this is one of those cases where an actor was heavily miscast, and with the writing and voice direction, I feel this was a waste of his talents. Even the final battle with Beta just seemed low budget, resorting to just still images. Overall, why this arc still gets a thumbs down from me unfortunately. I do applaud this arc for being mostly accurate to the source material, something I cannot say the same for the next coming saga, as well as adding new material to Amy's story, notably her affections for Sonic. The next arc Amy is involved in is Project Shadow, the Adventure 2 adaptation, where some cracks began to show for me. She still has her mistaken identity gag, and she still breaks Sonic out of prison just like in the game, and I did enjoy these scenes here just as much as I did in the game. Looking as if we're one-to-one with the game, we fast forward to the point where she's going to redeem Shadow and... oh. Right. So, it turns out that Chris has completely replaced Amy's role in this version of the story, and as a result, Amy does practically nothing in this arc. Some would argue that Amy didn't do much in the original story anyway, and some will also argue that Chris replacing Amy's role was actually better because of the fact that Chris is a human, but honestly, this was still Amy's shining moment. This was her scene. Everybody that has played the game, myself included, still knows and remembers this to be one of her best scenes in the entire franchise. It was a pivotal role too. She was the one to redeem Shadow in the final act. If she wasn't there to remind Shadow of Maria's actual true wish, the Earth would have been destroyed. This is honestly, in my opinion, the worst mishandling of any of the main characters has gotten on the show. It still feels awkward to this day watching Amy getting shafted into the sidelines, while also watching another character that wasn't even part of the main story at all taking her role. If this sounds a bit overkill, it would have been just as bad if Chris also replaced Amy's role in SA1, so that he's the one that reunites the Flickies with its parents because the writers suddenly remembered that, oh, Chris actually cares for animals. While I didn't exactly like her SA1 arc on the show as much as in the game, it was at least accurate to the source material. Not incorporating one of Amy's best moments in the Project Shadow arc was such a huge letdown. So after that disappointment, Amy assists the heroes in exposing and capturing Eggman for his crimes, which they succeeded in, and Eggman is put behind bars. With Eggman in prison, this newly found peace for everyone has led to another Amy-centered episode to play out. A Date to Forget, or in Japanese, Amy's Love Escape Journey. And oh boy, I'm about to go ham on this one. The episode starts off with Amy fuming over the fact that Sonic never showed up for their date. Wow, how shocking it was that Amy actually landed a date with Sonic, given how little attention Sonic has given her up to this point. Sam also arrives at the mansion and reveals that he too had plans with Sonic, showing off his new ride that he plans on racing Sonic with. Upset and enraged that they've both been stood up by Sonic, Amy decides to go out with Sam instead, hoping to not let the rest of the day go all to waste. During the ride, Amy vents on how Sonic is the most self-centered guy she knows, and how he always runs off and never has time to settle down with her. But Sam is completely oblivious to Amy's remarks, as he seems to only care about how cool his new car engine is, which in return annoys Amy. They decide to drop the topic of Sonic altogether and head to the beach, where they won't catch him there. However, the duo end up getting lost at a sheep farm, which is honestly kind of weird to me since it's common knowledge that a farm would be enclosed, but I digress. Amy complains about this, although Sam, as always, brushes the whole situation off, enraging Amy even more. Amy insists on getting a map, so they head to a nearby convenience store. However, Amy shows up rather dirty, as Sam forgot to put the roof up while they were riding along the everlasting desert in the rough terrain. Amy brushes off the dirt tainting her clothes and exclaims how Sam has been so upbeat and lighthearted towards the whole ordeal, which in return, Sam explains how he doesn't care if he arrives at their destination or not, just as long as he enjoys the journey there. That gave Amy a new revelation. of how much that sentiment reminded her of Sonic. Saying Sonic's name gave the store owner the opportunity to tell Amy and Sam about the time where Sonic had to save his grandson from a runaway horse. The store owner gives Amy a map and a bag of candies, and the duo leaves. But not before the store owner wishes them to give Sonic his regards. On the drive back, Amy opens the bag of candies given to her. Still in an unhappy mood, Amy states that Sonic should have been the one to receive the gift. But since saving people from danger is common ground for Sonic, he probably wouldn't even remember the incident. Amy opens up how Sonic is usually impolite, but it's still natural that people like him anyway, as he always ends up saving anyone he sees to be in danger, and it's those people he rescues that actually remembers. She also states that Sonic belongs to nobody, as he wouldn't even turn around to look at her. After all this time chasing after him, she still can't catch him. Sam remembers something important. He explains to Amy that his race was actually supposed to happen in the evening rather than during the day, meaning that only Amy has been stood up. When they stop by to eat some ice cream, Amy reveals to herself that maybe Sonic and her just simply aren't meant to be. Sam explains that he can't keep up with Sonic even with his vehicle. Amy asks him why he even bothers racing with him if he knows that he can never rival his speed, which Sam responds with the fact that he still has to try and that it's his dream to be a racer. Understandably, Amy sympathizes with him as she feels the exact same way with Sonic. But before they can talk about Sonic any longer, an Eggman machine speeds past them, seemingly heading towards the town Eggman is located. It's a full-on chase for the duo. Sam speeds up his car by switching modes. This transformation has unlocked the car's full power, allowing it to travel even faster than it already was able to do. Knowing that the town will be destroyed if the machine ends up reaching its destination, Sam takes a shortcut away from the road. They now face the machine head on. Amy gets out of her seat and prepares to lunge her hammer at the speeding vehicle. Sam warns her that she only has one chance to land the hit, in which Amy tells him that one shot is all she needs. She gives the machine a massive swing with her hammer and lands the hit. The machine malfunctions as a result and shortly after explodes. Upon their victory, Amy catches the wind blowing towards her as the car speeds up even more, rivaling Sonic's speed. This is where Amy finally realizes what Sonic always sees when running, and understands why he loves to run. I also gotta say that I absolutely love the outfit Amy wore in this episode. I'm already a huge fan of her modern outfit to begin with, so I always appreciate it when they add a few things to complement the outfit, such as the different but equally cool soap-like boots and the flower hair ribbon. Slap on the visor she wears at the final battle and she literally looks like something I would actually love to buy an action figure of. I'm surprised no such thing exists as far as I'm aware of. It does make me a little sad though that this outfit isn't talked about as much, if ever, as all the other outfits Amy wears on the show. Sure, it's basically the same as the one she always wears, minus a few things, but I just find it cool enough that I want to see more fan art of it or something. Reaching evening, the duo finally settles down at the beach. Amy expresses how alive she felt and how much she enjoyed the moment of looking through the lens of Sonic's speed. Sam also tells her that they could have gone even faster by going through supersonic speed, which Amy can only wish. Still, Amy insists that she'll try. She thanks Sam for not dunking out on her and letting her day all go to waste. So this seems like a happy ending for her after all. You might remember what I said before the episode, that I was going to go ham on this one and may be wondering what I meant by that exactly. Well, what happens next explains it. Sonic shows up. Amy is delighted to see him, thinking that he still cared for her. She runs towards him to give him a hug, but Sonic dodges her hug, leaving Amy to fall flat on her face as he decides to have a race with Sam instead. The two abandon Amy, leaving her hanging and screaming over the fact that she's been duped over twice. And that is the reason why this is the worst episode in the whole fucking show. Because of how much good things I've said up to this point, I'm gonna rip it apart to explain why this episode also fucking sucks ass. A little unprofessional perhaps, but still nonetheless. This has to be a contender for the ugliest episode in the show, as every character's proportions are way off, with heads being ridiculously large compared to their super small sized bodies, and all the set pieces look bland and uninspired. There's this consensus that Amy in the Japanese version is way more likable than what 4Kids portrayed her to be, and I'm not going to try to refute that argument, because no one is saying the 4Kids dub is better. Everyone knows the Japanese version is the definitive way to watch the show. I know this as well, it's common knowledge. But I swear, people just throw this whole watch in Japanese argument around without really giving a thoughtful reason or reasons as to why that's the case. So I decided to watch the episode in Japanese, and honestly, I think this episode is just as bad in the Japanese version. There is a 7-second long clip of Amy holding Chris at a chokehold, threatening to beat him up as Sonic doesn't come out. The English version tones the scene down by just having Amy accusing Chris of hiding Sonic from her. Sure, she does apologize afterwards, but this whole beginning scene of Amy having a temper tantrum just drags on for too long in both versions. I was like, oh my god, this is really taking forever, can we please move on? This whole episode feels slow too. The pacing is just off. Since the ending makes this whole episode feel like filler, it feels like nothing happens in this episode. The only purpose it has is to introduce Emerald, which is literally at the very end of the episode. You don't even need to watch the episode at all. You can literally take the episode out of the show and nothing would change. I'm not saying every single episode in a TV show needs to move the plot forward in some way, because I can imagine that also presenting a problem with the pacing. But if the show has way more filler episodes when nothing happens than actual good ones, that becomes an issue for me. Unlike what most people seem to think, Sonic actually does acknowledge the date in both versions. In the English version, he says, "Thanks to you, I'm late on my date with Amy," and even acknowledges Amy at the beach in the Japanese version. So there's absolutely no excuse for him to completely ditch Amy like he did just then. You know, he could have at least accepted the hug, because clearly he didn't have a problem with it in the previous episodes. And even then, there were times where both Sonic and Amy were alone together. This right here is just lazy writing. This episode also marks the beginning of the running gag of Amy getting duped out on going on dates with Sonic flunking out on her, and people fucking love that shit. You know, it's funny when Sonic doesn't give a shit about Amy's safety in the Riders games. It's funny when Sonic puts his hand on Amy's face in the party scene in Generations. And it's absolutely funny when Amy gets rightfully mad at him for being dumped by him. We excuse Sonic's edgy behavior all the time by saying, "Oh, don't worry, that's just Sonic being Sonic." But Amy having a hint of edge herself is enough for people to write long-ass paragraphs as to why she's this toxic, problematic character, and anybody that likes her are problematic individuals as well. It pisses me off so much. I'm gonna make the biggest, boldest statement. Sonic is flat out the worst character in the whole show for me. I know that's gonna turn heads. How can I say that when Chris is literally right there? And yeah, I can criticize him too. He's got his own set of flaws as well. But despite Sonic's name being in the title, he is barely the main character for most of the episodes. Because most of the time, all the focus is on Chris and Sonic's friends as they go on whatever adventures they entail, while Sonic just fucks off somewhere to take a nap and doesn't show up again until the end, where he saves the day from the villain of the week, because he's the hero and he's the one that should be rooting for. It's so fucking annoying how literally every episode in the early seasons has this exact same premise, except for literally the first two and the one he's not even in. Even episodes I like suffer from the same exact problem. Sonic's behavior comes off as incredibly antisocial that it's so jarring compared to the adventure characterization beforehand, and his motivations seem so inconsistent and whack. He doesn't seem to give a shit about anyone, or anything that happens around him unless the plot writes him in a way to get him to care. It's more on the writers reminding the audience that, hey, he's still the main character here, he's still the hero we need to root for. Even though he spends the vast majority of the show absent, he is quite literally a flat character. It's not the character itself that cares, if you get what I mean. I know people are going to say, that's how Sonic in the show acts, given the episode itself says that Sonic himself is impolite but still cares deep down. But really, it's hard to believe that since he spends the vast majority of the first season, and even a good chunk of this season as well, absent, away from the group. It drives me fucking nuts when I see people shitting on Amy in the show for being vastly different from her previous and even future characterizations, yet praise the living hell out of Sonic in this show. despite both their ex-counterparts being pretty different from their characterizations in adventure games. At least with Amy, she still maintains her traits and story arcs from those games, while also adding more depth into her character. Yes, she gets aggressive a bunch of times, which is a main factor for this portrayal of the character, but for what I've seen, personally, she quickly forgets about the thing she's angry about. And even in context to this episode with Chris, she apologizes for her actions. Sonic himself never felt all that deep to me. And I know people are going to say, well, he's not supposed to be that deep, bro. But given what I said about Sonic not giving a shit towards anyone, I think I'll rest my case. Sonic gets absolutely no karma for his shitty behavior since. Not even in the season finale where, spoiler, he gives Amy a rose, which in all honesty doesn't really make up for it in my opinion, as there's nothing indicating him having any regrets for his past behavior. All this Sonic X Sonic glazing honestly gives me the impression that most of these people are little boys that think girls are all stupid, annoying, gross, etc. Or just see Sonic as this imaginary friend and feel attacked whenever Sonic himself feels attacked or something like that. But even then, so many people in the Sonic fandom blindly kiss Sonic's ass in every one of these situations and act like he's the victim that deserves sympathy, when really, Sonic in Sonic X is this unlikable, antisocial jerk-ass that doesn't give a shit about anyone, notably those who are supposed to be his closest friends. And for that, I have to say that I'm fucking glad he got that treatment in the Cruise Blues episode. Because even though I have problems with that episode too, it's so incredibly satisfying seeing an absolute nuisance being put in his place throughout the whole 20-minute runtime. The most frustrating thing about all of this is that I don't actually hate the premise of the episode. I absolutely love the arc Amy went through, of understanding Sonic's carefree nature and his love for speed. I felt this was the character development she desperately needed, so it felt great to see it happen, and I was happy for her. But the episode itself didn't think so, as the entire 75-second long scene of Amy declaring that Sonic belongs to no one is cut from the English dub. And that whole arc is thrown out the window at the end, where Amy never learns from it, nor brings it up ever again in future episodes. Because the very next episode has her completely forgetting about the incident as if nothing happened, as she goes right back to obsessing over Sonic like she always does. And it just makes me cringe so much to see Amy still in this mindset that, oh, maybe Sonic does actually care about me. Like, really? After what he did to you? Bro, if I was her, I would just be leaving right away to find another fish in the sea. It really made me wish that Amy would just find someone else that would actually love her the way she is and won't treat her like shit. I'm not implying that the episode should have ended with Amy finally getting with Sonic, but they certainly didn't need to end it like they did here. I felt like my time was wasted watching this episode. And I don't know about you, but that is probably the worst feeling anyone could have when watching a movie or TV show. That the piece of media you put your time investing into was a waste of time. I felt cheated and actually felt like I got punked, and not in a good way. It's in the same vein as watching a post-movie SpongeBob or a Modern Family Guy episode. I knew going into the show that this was going to be a much more assertive and aggressive version of the character, but I still felt awfully bad for her, even back when I watched it the first time, as she seemed genuinely upset, and seeing her going through this arc of admitting that she is just not compatible to be with Sonic, I really did sympathize with her. So it rightfully pisses me off when all I see is people saying that this episode was Amy at her worst and that she deserved this treatment. People actually think she deserved to get dumped like that by both Sonic and Sam, because this whole episode is written like it's trying to make it seem like it's Amy's fault. I really just want to ask people with that mindset just, what the actual fuck are you talking about? Because clearly the people that laugh at this obviously never been stood up by someone or had their happiness taken away from them. I would just love to put these people in Amy's shoes to see if they'll still be laughing while someone they admire steps all over them like they're nothing. Basically, everybody that laughs at this scene at some point is a dick. Nobody talks about this episode. Nobody remembers this episode. Nor do people bring up Amy's beautiful arc. No, all people talk about is the beginning and end scenes. It's why all these YouTube and social media accounts constantly post these scenes out of context to paint Amy as this crazy person, because nobody remembers or cares about anything else in this episode. Just the stupid fucking entire piece of animation of Sonic supposedly being Sonic, because, oh, isn't Sonic such a massive giga chad for pointing this annoying pink brat? that's been constantly bothering him in his place? Because that's what all Amy in Sonic X is to everyone. A temperamental, psychotic, crazy bitch with no redeemable qualities that we're supposed to hate on for being a temperamental, psychotic, crazy bitch with no redeemable qualities. And we laugh at her each and every time she gets duped, forever believing she has a chance. So overall, while I do think there are episodes that are written objectively worse, I still hate this episode even more. This is, without a doubt, my least favourite episode in the whole show, because it represents the absolute worst qualities of Sonic X to me. I really wanted to love this one, but I just couldn't. It's the prime example of how one scene alone can ruin an entire episode. Every single character has been flanderized to shit, including Sam, who despite playing a major factor in Amy's arc in the episode, immediately ditches Amy and forgets all about her the second Sonic shows up. The beginning is so hard to watch, while the rest of the episode is just boring. The animation and art style looks incredibly ugly, with characters looking off-model, and the entire thing looking and feeling low budget. And every single good thing about it, Amy's arc, the slightly different outfit she wears, and even the car chase scene, has been completely thrown out the window by an ending that is not only mean-spirited and is only made for a quick joke, but is also to remind me that this is yet again another shitty filler episode and it was a waste of my time. It stuck out to me like a sore thumb then, and it still does now. And I just wanna put a fist in Sonic's face for being such an annoying, smug, condescending, unfunny, disrespectful, irritating, jerk-ass, douchebag piece of shit! I hope you rot in hell! Okay, I don't know what came to me just then, but I think I totally unleashed just then. I could go on, but honestly, I think I droned on long enough as is, and believe it or not, I still got a review to do. Can't believe I'm only 2 videos into this retrospective, and I'm already having a go at the Sonic fanbase, but this will certainly not be the last time. I just gotta calm down. I know things have been pretty tough on me for the past few years now, but I just gotta hold it in for 4 more videos, and I can finally be free. I just gotta breathe in and out. Okay, let's go. So continue away from that tangent, Eggman eventually breaks out of prison. This initiates a fighting tournament set up by the government, where the winner will win a Chaos Emerald. Amy, like the others, participates in this tournament. If there's one thing about the games that I'm glad didn't get translated into the show at all, it's Amy's portrayal in Sonic Battle. Because that portrayal of her was something else, alright. But she first faces off against Bookin, which she makes quick work of. She then has to fight Sonic, although things become pretty awkward between the two, as neither of them want to fight each other. That is, until Eggman shows up, prompting Sonic to save Amy from his attacks, and chases after him, thus disqualifying himself from the competition. Now in the top 8, Amy has to face off against Rouge. As both girls are complete powerhouses, you would expect this to be an extremely close battle. Well, you would be wrong, because even back then, I can't help but feel pretty disappointed and underwhelmed that this battle is only a 10-second slideshow of still images where Amy doesn't even land a hit on her, and Rouge ends up disarming her, leaving Amy eliminated. I know it may seem like I'm dragging on the show's budget, as they probably couldn't afford to animate this whole sequence any better than what they're only able to pull off, but I always thought Amy would have put up a much better fight, considering her past and even future feats on the show. What we got here is just lame, and only proves Amy's inconsistent power scaling on the show. So Amy's out of the running, leading to Emerald winning the whole thing, but when he receives the Emerald, that's when he starts going haywire and wrecking everything in his path. Amy tried to stop him, only to be easily subdued by Emerald's power. Fortunately, Sonic does come to save her, twice to be exact. While I find the Sonic battle arc to be mostly forgettable, with nothing noteworthy to mention out of my head, I'll admit that Cream giving the final blow to Emerald and crying afterwards was pretty heartbreaking to watch. In the Japanese version at least. The English version of the scene isn't anywhere near as emotional and gut-wrenching, but considering how far into the series we are, that's probably a tradition by now. After the consecutive successes of saving the world, everybody settles down where all seems to be well and happy. Amy in particular opens up her own cafe where she actually works there as a waitress, greeting passing customers. Here she talks with Chris about what it's like living as carefree as Sonic, now that the whole nation is celebrating the freedom movement and wanting to be like him. This neat insight of Amy's life on Earth was, you guess it, cut from the dub. It's becoming kind of predictable for me to point it out at this point because it seems like every single scene that adds or builds into Amy's character is either removed or altered in the dub. It only made me assume that whoever is in charge of the English dubbing of the show really did not like the character, but I digress. This newly found freedom, however, has warped everybody's perception on what is actually happening, because with every consecutive Chaos Control event caused by Supersonic, more and more elements from Sonic's world have migrated onto Earth, with the two planets slowly but surely merging into one. They were once one planet many years ago, but due to unknown circumstances, they were separated into two parallel universes, unaware of each other's existence. This presents a huge problem, as when the two timelines completely merge, both timelines will cancel each other out, resulting in a world where time is non-existent. Nothing will change or age. There will be no such thing as the past or the future because every day will be the same due to Earth itself being frozen in time. Knowing that this time suspension phenomenon is irreversible once it completes its transition and everybody would be stuck on Earth forever, a solution is proposed, and that solution is to bring Sonic and friends back home. Everyone may be running out of time, but they still have enough time to say their final goodbyes to the people they have befriended on Earth. A scene cut from the dub shows Amy looking back at her apartment at Station Square, clearly saddened as she watches every single one of her belongings she has accumulated during her time living there slowly fade out of existence, which she now carries in her briefcase. This scene is quite emotional actually, as she has lived there ever since the start of the season, where we watched her grow as a character over time. But as we know, all good things must come to an end. And this is one of those times. Amy tearfully expresses her goodbyes to Ella, crying in her arms, during which Ella gives Amy her own cookbook that she can use to make her own recipes back home. A neat callback to her cooking hobby she has demonstrated a few times on the show. Everyone goes to the portal and are all sent home. Well, most people. Just when Sonic was about to leave, the unexpected happened. Chris shuts down the portal, leaving Sonic still stuck on Earth. Very pivotal moment indeed, not only for Sonic, but for Chris as well. This is arguably the scene where people have started to hate on Chris, if they haven't already, which I can see why. He does appear to be pretty clingy towards the idea of letting Sonic go many times in this series. It feels pretty weird in hindsight because really, Chris doesn't hang out with Sonic all that much, as in most episodes he's either with his family or with Sonic's friends. Just not with Sonic himself, as again he's always running off on his own, but that could be due to the bad writing on his behalf. Still, this is not a Sonic X Chris video in hand, so I won't go any further as to why people dislike him, but I will have to hand it to him, because without Chris we wouldn't get the next upcoming scenes. Now back on Sonic's world, Amy stays by at Cream's place. Cream and her mom propose that Amy lives with them for the time being, but Amy declines the offer, as she still has hope that Sonic will return eventually. They were, however, interrupted by Eggman's loud threats outside, which in return angers Amy enough to throw a hammer far towards the ship, doing actual damage on the outside. In shock, Eggman still proceeds to taunt Amy even further, using Sonic's absence to add fuel to the fire. But just when they thought Amy couldn't do anything, as her hammer is already wedged into Eggman's ship, Amy summons another hammer out of nowhere, and a fiery aura surrounds her, frightening everyone in the scene, including the Eggman trio, and prompting Cream and Vanilla to lock their doors to protect themselves from Amy's wrath. She then sends more hammers thrown their way, as the Eggman trio still reluctantly throw more insults at her. I'll admit that I actually quite like how they handled her temper here, channeling her anger to good use and in a way that benefits her, I'd say. You guys will most likely know what's coming up next. It's arguably one of, if not the most famous scene for Amy in this whole show. And I'm sure that everybody that has watched the show in the past still remembers to this day. It is arguably my favourite scene, not only in this show, but throughout the entire franchise, period. While there have been a couple people that made breakdowns and analysis of the scene on the internet, I don't think there's anybody on this platform at the very least that has. So that's what I'm going to do. Right here, right now. We first see Amy looking out the window, with Cream sleeping on her lap. A bright yellow star shines in the night sky. A closer look reveals that star to be that of Supersonic. He's finally here, back home at last. The scene then cuts to a camera pan shot of the house interior, revealing what appears to be the living room, with a close-up shot showing a photo of Amy happily hugging Sonic that was taken sometime during the adventure, a contrast to the dark and cold-looking interior of Cream's house. That dark setting symbolizes the tone of the episode, and how Amy was feeling up to this point. She's been worried, sick, and upset over Sonic being gone for who knows how long, ever since her arrival back home. So seeing Sonic making his return was that light to erase that darkness and cold feeling she's been having. Happy at the revelation, Amy starts taking off, running through the warm summer night, following Sonic's direction. From afar, Sonic oversees Amy, and it looks like he's actually slowing down for her, as he lowers his elevation in the sky to remain close to her. This may came off as a shocker for most people watching, as we will see shortly. It seems like he has something to hide that we, as the audience, don't know. A time lapse occurs as the night sky slowly fades out and into sunrise. Amy has been running for hours throughout the whole night to get to where Sonic is. She has to be tired by now, but knowing Amy's driven and competitive nature, she's not gonna slow down. She finally arrives, facing completely parallel to Sonic's position. As expected, she is out of breath from all the running she did. The very next shot shows the house Sonic was waiting outside of. To be that of Amy's? This is very unusual for Sonic. The blue hedgehog, known for travelling at the speed of sound, is taking his first stop at a house belonging to someone that nobody thought he would visit. Not to Tails, not to Knuckles, not to anyone else, but Amy. The same girl that Sonic was constantly avoiding and running away from throughout the entire series. He surely must have got the wrong house. He must have been thinking of running off again. But he doesn't. He still remains where he is. Come to think of it, he must have been waiting outside Amy's house all night. So of course he would. Of course he would think she would be at her house and didn't want to wake her up until the next morning. So he was just as shocked to see Amy standing behind him. As Amy is still catching her breath, there is a brief moment where the two just stare at each other, not saying anything. Sonic eventually breaks the silence by greeting in his usual upbeat, happy-go-lucky nature. Amy in return snaps back by calling him an idiot, which, by this point for viewers, isn't out of the ordinary for her. But this snappiness is short-lived, as it quickly turns into heartbreak, as she finally breaks down in tears. She expresses how she's really been feeling the past week. Ever since they've been sent back to their homeworld, Amy was afraid that she wasn't ever going to see Sonic again, and he was never going to come back. The thought of Sonic being gone forever has driven her crazy. Still crying her eyes out, Amy reveals the decision she has made the night before Sonic arrived. She has decided to wait for Sonic for the rest of time, no matter how old she'll be. But just when she was about to make that decision, he came back. This is where Amy collapses down to her knees, still crying happy tears. She is really bawling now. Even throughout this, Sonic still doesn't say anything to break up her crying. He just stands there with a grin on his face. Despite my criticisms towards Sonic earlier in the series, I love how he's portrayed here. Judging from his silence, reaction, and the fact that he's even outside her house in the first place, he must already know how much he meant to Amy. We then see the sign of Amy's house, as she pleads and begs Sonic, the million-dollar question, to say that he loves her. Surely this has to be a hard sell for Sonic, since he's never been in this situation before. But as the scene fades to white and back again, Amy sees a rose in front of her. A long shot reveals the whole scenery, with villages, trees, and gardens brightened up by the morning sun. But what's most important is Sonic. He's now kneeling down on one knee, down to where Amy is, handing her the rose. Sonic then says to her something that we as the audience have no idea, as his response was intentionally muted, all in a while giving her a smile and a wink. But whatever he said, this was enough for Amy to completely lose it, hugging him and crying out of happiness. Sonic of course hugs her back, while smiling at her reaction, as the two embrace one another, and the scene continues to pan upwards to the bright blue sky. We don't actually hear any sounds coming from Sonic or Amy after Amy begs Sonic to say he loves her. The only thing we hear is the insert song playing as the scene slowly fades out with the song itself. While we're on the subject of songs and love, let's talk about the songs used for this scene. The background insert song differs between whatever version of the scene you're watching. The original Japanese TV broadcast of the scene has the song Natsu no Hi, sung by the Japanese band Of Course, which the title also translates to Summer Day in English. This is also one of the 3 Of Course insert songs on the show, along with Kotoba Nai Dekanai and Midori no Hibi, pardon my pronunciations. However, virtually every other release of the Japanese version replaces this song along with all the other Of Course insert songs, possibly due to licensing reasons, but I could be wrong on that. For most releases of the Japanese version, notably the Hulu and the DVD releases, the scene has Hikaru Michi, roughly translating to The Shining Road in English, playing instead. This song was also played in the episode endings between the 14th and the 39th episode, as well as in every Season 3 episode ending. The song itself is fine enough for what it is, and does the job well enough to convey the same emotion and message, but adding The Shining Road to the scene honestly doesn't hit the same for me as with Natsu no Hi, because by this point, the song has already been played many times, as seen with the aforementioned episode endings, and as we see later down the road with Season 3, this song isn't exclusive to this scene entirely. Natsu no Hi is easily, without question, an 80s love song, word by word, beat by beat. If you match the lyrics and beat with how the scene changes and the different camera shots, I'm sure you'll see what I'm talking about. Just line up the lyrics and the timing of each beat to how the scene cuts from one shot to another. It does seem like the entire scene was made with this song in mind. In short, Natsu no Hi is the song for this scene, full stop. I probably won't delve too much into the lyrics of both songs as they get drowned out by the dialogue, and I'm sure somebody out there would probably make a better breakdown of the lyrics than I ever could, but from what I conceive with the English translations, it does seem like they're describing both Sonic and Amy's point of view, Natsu no Hi representing Sonic's while the Shining Road representing Amy's, with lines such as, "Let's kiss quietly in secret," and "You called my name for the first time on a summer day, I started to fall in love with you." While I'm at it, I might as well talk about the Shining Road scene as well, as it very much parallels the scene in terms of how it's crafted. We first see the buildings and skyscrapers in the night. The night then fades into what appears to be dawn. Sonic is also seen on top of one, looking out at the distance, while the sun still rises so slightly. The scene cuts to Sonic walking along what appears to be a park, through the morning mist, stopping at a nearby tree. Behind the tree is Amy looking at Sonic with a worried expression on her face. The scene ends with the two still looking at each other without saying a word. If you can tell, I love this scene just as much as Natsu no Hi, as it's what I consider to be a perfect example of show don't tell. The character's body language and expressions explains everything you need to know without using any dialogue. In fact, everything about the scene completely mirrors and parallels Natsu no Hi, judging from the different camera shots you can see here that I'll just leave on the screen. I should also talk about the colour of the rose Sonic gives to Amy, as I think it also has meaning. It's up to interpretation as to what colour it actually is, as well as their meanings themselves. Some will say it's white, while others will argue that it's a lilac or lavender colour. I'll go through both. From what I've gathered on the internet, a lilac rose typically symbolises eternity, long life, and happiness, whereas a white one usually represents purity, innocence, young love, and new beginnings. As you can tell already, both these meanings seem positive, which explains why Amy reacted the way she did here. So for those that still seem a little uncertain as to whether Sonic actually did return Amy's feelings due to his response being muted, Keep in mind the entire scene playing out. From the sequence of Amy running, to both Sonic and Amy's reaction and dialogue, to the background music being a literal love song word to word, it's pretty hard to refute that. If anything, I'd argue that Sonic's response is the most Sonic-y response he could ever pull off. Because he's never been vocal about his feelings for Amy until now, which could be interpreted as him being shy like a bunch of people in the fandom would say. So when they're alone together without anyone else to judge them, that's when Sonic starts feeling comfortable around her. I also have to say that this is, without a doubt, a contender for the best looking episode in the whole series. The show gets a lot of flack from fans, and myself included, as you've seen earlier in this video, for being pretty inconsistent and even downright ugly with its art style. But this episode in particular is an exception. Judging from whoever was the lead animator in each of them, it's pretty easy to see which episodes had the most budget and care put into them, and why those particular episodes are regarded as some of the show's best, and for good reason. It's a shame that most of the show isn't on the same quality, as if it was, I'm sure that the show would have had a much different reception compared to what it ended up getting. Both Sonic and Amy here look completely on model to their character sheet, and I just love how everything looks. The lighting and shading, the art style, Amy herself, Super Sonic always looking amazing at all the times he's on, Cream's house interior, the sequence of Amy running, the overview of Sonic's world, the ocean and the night sky, the sun rising, Amy's mushroom-like house, and all the other houses around the show's rendition of Green Hill. I think I made my point clear. Everything about this scene is beautiful to me. Seeing how beautiful Sonic's world and Green Hill looked made me wish we had gotten more episodes of Sonic and Friends hanging out in their world and seeing its locations, because I've always wanted to know more about it. It's a shame that we don't spend that much time on Sonic's world compared to being on Earth, because I can imagine how better the show would have been otherwise. I talked about how much I loved Sonic here, but I absolutely love Amy's characterization even more. Despite being exposed to Amy's brash demeanor throughout most of the series, particularly with her crush towards Sonic, her selfless side is shown on full display here. Everybody may have seemed to have lost hope on Sonic returning, but Amy was the only one that still believed in him. Her decision to wait for Sonic for the rest of the time, even if it meant she'll die of old age in the process, is something I admire so much. And I absolutely love Taeko Kawata's acting here, because good lord, her acting still gives me chills and goosebumps to this day. She completely sells the role, and you can hear how passionate she sounds whenever she's crying her eyes out begging for Sonic to confess his love to her, or where she's overjoyed to find out Sonic was back. This was all done by a voice actor and voice directors that clearly gave a shit. This scene honestly just takes me back to the old, happier, simpler times, where the days are much brighter and carefree, and everyone, myself included, had a good time with memories made. However, sometimes in life you are forced to say goodbye to people you care about. Your friends, family, partner, or whoever you're close to, whether it's due to death or splitting up to move to a new town. The thought of losing someone you care about is surely something one couldn't bear to handle. Seeing these characters reunite while embracing one another just takes me back to that childhood innocence where everything was filled with joy, all in a while not having a care in the world, and appreciating the time you have, because you don't know what you got until it's gone. Even if you're only a kid for a short amount of time, and then afterwards you stop being a kid forever, it's moments like these that we still cherish and remember for the rest of our lives. I don't usually bring up other dubbed versions of the show, but I just have to bring up the French dub here. The French dub of the scene is actually quite on point with the Japanese version, with the entire scene and the Natsu no Hi song, albeit played at a slightly higher pitch, completely intact and all. The only main difference it has, however, is Sonic's response, where he actually says that he loves her. Yeah, who knew? They don't call Paris a city of love for nothing after all, do they? This, along with the entire scene being the same as the Japanese version, and the added crying and laughter at the end, is honestly the reason why the French dub is my personal favourite version of the scene, with the original Japanese TV broadcast being an extremely close second. So I gushed about pretty much everything about the scene, the music, the voice acting, the characters, the visuals. I also love how this whole scene leaves so much room for interpretation, whether you're speculating what Sonic actually said that made Amy hug him, or even what the rose symbolizes, as I discussed earlier. What I can say, I just love it when scenes like these and The Shining Road allows viewers to think outside the box, which is sadly something I don't say a lot to any other moments in the franchise ever since. In summary, this is pretty much what I consider to be a perfect scene to me, as it hits the mark in practically every single aspect I could think of. But you also might be wondering if there's anything remotely bad I can say about it. And surprisingly, there is. And it's that the English version of the scene is nowhere near as good as the original. What a shocker. Not all too surprising, it seems. So much of the entire sequence of Amy running has been trimmed drastically to fit the 4Kids runtime. The insert songs in that case were also replaced with generic 4Kids orchestral stock. Some would argue that this may be due to licensing reasons, as I said before, but removing what is supposed to be an emotional love song, along with trimming the running sequence, erases all the suspense, emotion, and build-up the original scene had. The final blow, however, was Amy's message in the English dub. While it may be seen as nearly identical to how she decided to wait for Sonic, her pleas for Sonic to love her back has been replaced with Amy begging Sonic to never leave her again. All that build-up in suspense, just to say that. The most baffling edit to me was the decision to remove Amy's sign, which is not only pathetic on 4Kids' part, as it shows how dumb they are for thinking kids couldn't handle to read text, but it's also inconsistent to a previous shot, where it actually still has Amy's sign completely intact and all. I will play devil's advocate a little bit here by saying that I actually do quite like Lisa Ortiz's acting. I probably won't go too much into her performances here though, as I think I'll reserve my takes on Amy's voice actors in the future. But the weak dialogue and script just still doesn't hold a candle towards Taeko Kawata's superb acting. I may have liked the English dub of the scene back then, but watching it now with the knowledge of the Japanese version in mind just made me cringe in embarrassment, just by how watered down the whole thing is. A mockery of the emotion and raw power the original scene had. A massive letdown. And with that, we have concluded the second season, which also would have been the ending to this whole series. In case you didn't know, this show was originally only supposed to get 2 seasons, with Sonic and Friends going back home to be the final episode to conclude it all. But because of how insanely popular the show was in America, a 3rd season was greenlit. I've heard from a few sources that it was actually 4Kids themselves that commissioned a 3rd season, in which I'm actually inclined to believe that, since looking at the designs of the Meteorix and Cosmo species, it kinda made me believe they were trying to sell more toys, thus milking more money out of the show. But then again, I could be wrong on that. Come to think of it, the fact that the show wasn't all that popular at all in Japan, to a point where the 3rd season wasn't aired there at all until 2020, in preparation for the first Sonic movie, I felt that was the primary reason why the Sonic franchise never got on another anime show ever again, because of how Sonic X underperformed in its home country. This season was quite a roller coaster in itself. There were way more plot elements being introduced and implemented, as we saw with the adventure adaptations, and things picked up tremendously. Most importantly, we get to see more insights to Amy's affections for Sonic from her perspective, ultimately leading to the climax where Amy reunites with him, fulfilling her long-term pursuit of winning Sonic's heart. But there were also a handful of mishaps I had to mention. The sloppy writing in some of the episodes, the altered and deleted scenes that affected Amy's characterization in the West, all the differences between the 4Kids and the Japanese dub becoming more egregious and prominent in this season compared to the first. While it is nice to see Amy's SA1 arc mostly intact, the game adaptations are generally not as good as the games themselves. Because of this, you might be thinking that I hate the season more than the first, due to the fact that I seem to have way more negative things to say about it than I did about season 1, but that isn't the case at all. I absolutely like the season way more, because really the reason why I have way more criticisms towards it, it's because the season itself has way more things going for it. Whereas with season 1, nothing really noteworthy happens, with almost every episode having the exact same premise, thus being a bit boring to talk about as a whole, for me anyway. But as happy Amy is now with her newly found love, her, as well as Sonic's journey, are not over just yet. because there is still another season ahead of them. Will Sonic and Amy's relationship continue to blossom, or will cracks begin to show along the way? We'll find out next time in the final season of the show, where things will go into a much darker direction and it will be such an emotional roller coaster up ahead.